Rain, I was thinking about you.
It's 1:30. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Rockdale Planning and Zoning meeting of Tuesday, August the 5th, 2025. Roll call, please. Oh, it's calling in. Glenn.
Chair Williams,
Here.
Vice Chair Ratliff. Here. Commissioner Miles.
Here.
Commissioner Flores.
Here.
Commissioner Houston.
Here.
Commissioner Mendoza. Commissioner Higdon.
Here.
And Council Liaison Daniel Willey.
Here.
We have a quorum. Please stand with me as we have the Pledge of Allegiance and invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good and glorious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for all the blessings that you filled our lives with. Lord, we ask that you watch over and bless the city of Rockdale and its citizens. Lord, bless this meeting and the decisions and discussion that are made herein. Lord, please be with us and guide our thoughts and minds that you might find it all pleasing to you and in accordance with your will. Lord, we ask all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Do we have any citizens' communications?
No, sir.
All right. Under the presentation, I've got one question, and then I will turn it over to Ben. Do any of y'all, I think, Daniel, you're the only one that might have had access to the master plan. Do y'all, any of y'all have the master plan?
I still have a copy of it, yes, sir.
So that's 6, would be 6. Okay. Take it away.
So this council meeting was slower than our normal council meetings as far as agenda items. There was one that I'll comment on that pertains, or two that pertains to the planning commission potentially. The first is we're going through a fee schedule amendment. The first amendment is minor. We referred to two of the same fees in two different ways. And so we're just cleaning that up as far as building permits go. The one that I've found that the planning commission might find of interest is that Tim has been working on getting funding for street improvements. And so that was actually put on as a tax note for their consideration to move forward with that. And with that, Tim can either answer any questions further about that or myself, if you have any questions.
So the goal through that tax note and through the budgeting process is to increase the amount of funding that we have on an annual basis to about $500,000 a year for street reconstruction, which is not going to get all the roads fixed in a year, but hopefully it will allow us to get caught up and take care of that on a regular basis. And I am expecting that is going to be a number that will be on the books for a long time and potentially only increase with inflation as things get more expensive in the future. But with that funding, you know, if we are able to do, I was talking to Nathan Bland at Rotary today, and he said with $500,000, we might be able to do 10 streets in the town, and perhaps we will be able to do that. But the problem is if we rehab a street and it lasts for 15 or 20 years, by the time we get through all the streets, we're going to have to start back over again. So it is a never-ending effort, and one we want to plan for.
You say increase it to 500,000?
Yes. So right now we are budgeting about $85,000 for street improvements, and rather than jump from $85,000 to $500,000, I'm proposing to issue a tax note, and we'll use a portion of that note to supplement what we have in the general fund and increase annually. If this year we're budgeting $85,000, next year we might budget $150,000 or $175,000. The next year $250,000 or $275,000, and so on, until we get to the point, and then use the tax note to add to that to start immediately doing $500,000 a year.
Now, is this repairs or resurfacing or?
This is for repair, resurfacing. I mean, it's not for patching. It is for either new asphalt or milling and constructing base and relaying asphalt.
So it'd be for a street.
Reconstruction,
Okay.
Not patching.
not patching. Now, if you do a street in asphalt, and it starts to show wear over about, after maybe 15 years, typically you can come back and overlay that with another 1.5 inches of asphalt, and that'll last for another 15 years. But then you have to come back and actually mill that down, because the street itself serves as a storage capacity for stormwater.
Yeah.
And as you layer asphalt, it take away from its capacity in that respect. So eventually it needs to be milled down. I mean, I've seen some cities put, 3 and 4 layers of asphalt, and then your curbs disappear when you do that. And it's not a good situation.
It's gonna come to the streets department. We're not gonna be involved with prioritizing which streets.
It will hopefully come through the street department is what I anticipate, but definitely, we would welcome your input. Last year, we put together, and with Ben, and the streets department, we put together a list of all the streets in the city and their current conditions. And I'd like to be able to prioritize those so that the streets that we actually have kind of a 3 to 5 year plan. These are the streets we're gonna do this year, next year, and the following year, and then every year amend that, so that when people complain about their street, we can look at the list and see if it's on the list for the next 3 years and let them know when to expect that it's gonna get done.
What percentage of the streets are not paved at all? Do you know?
Not paved? I didn't run that number. Man,
We have alleys that are not paved, but I don't know that there might be a couple of streets that are.
there's several. It's not a high percentage that aren't paved, but there are.
The only ones I ever see, there's a couple like going out Ackerman. When you go out toward Cornerstone, there's a couple on that right-handed side that go back. I don't know if they're paved, but I don't think there's very many.
Yeah, right before you leave town. To the right.
Yeah, Smith's not paved. Isaac's not paved. There's several.
Short
in
little
the
stretch
city.
over by Bandas, that,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm not even sure it's listed as a street.
and
by
we
the way.
and
It's not paved, what is the surface?
it's either dirt or gravel. Most time it's gravel, some type of gravel base.
There's not many. I mean,
There's not many, and in that spreadsheet he's referring to, if it was dirt or gravel and it wasn't paved, we automatically put it as a failure street as far as condition wise, because it needs to be paved.
I know we're kind of off target here, but like Redbud, that's a total rebuild, a total disaster. But
Yeah, that's a failing street, and in that street, it was determined that it was not the trees in the median that is causing that street to
Really?
behave that way. It's actually the neighbors' trees. And you can go out there and look at it.
Next to the street?
You can see the roots coming up from the ground, and that's an indicator that your tree roots aren't deep enough and it's affecting your concrete out there. And the trees in the median are deep-rooted trees that are not causing that. Because there was a plan 2 years ago to fix that street, but first we were going to take those trees out in the median. We hired an arborist, and they told us that those trees are not causing that. So we have not replaced those trees.
So what do you do about that?
As far,
The neighbor, is it in,
it would be,
Those trees are most likely in the right of way, and so, what we will end up probably having to do is when we come through, and remove the concrete, we'll probably have to remove part of the root structure that is, affecting the streets, before we come back with it. And it could potentially, based on recommendation, we might have to remove the trees.
Have no one complained about it on that street? Is that why it's been like that so long?
there's been complaints about
Yeah,
the street.
I thought we,
And that's why we
Yeah.
started that investigation 2 years ago, and then we found out. And I know there were some property owners at the time that weren't willing to part ways with those trees,
they
and
wanted to keep the tree.
that was one as well.
Right.
You don't want to repair that street and pay all that money for it to do the same thing it's going to do now. So there just needs to be a discussion with the neighbors on that area of what we need to do, how important it is to fix that street, because that is a failure street.
Figured they might have wanted it like that so to keep the traffic slow. We'll do that. They would. That's why I asked that if anybody complained.
Like a
One
speed
neighbor.
bump.
No, it's, you can drive out there if you have time, go drive out there. It's almost every tree out there that lines those roads. All the roots are above grade and are affecting that road.
Might be easier to do them all than try to tell one neighbor they gotta get rid of their one tree.
Tim mentioned it, and either one of you can answer the question. Explain again where the money's coming from, because we've never had that discussion before.
So ultimately, the money's gonna come from, from property taxes. So, you know, if we issue the tax note, that'll help supplement the general fund, but that's still property tax revenue that's using to pay off that debt. It would be a 7-year note. And we probably would use those funds over the next 3 to 4 years. But then when those run out, then we would be just funding it with general fund revenues, ad valorem revenues.
Did you mention something about a grant earlier? No?
I did talk about a grant, for some park improvements, but not for streets.
Is it in the same category as like a regular maintenance of streets, like, I guess patching, or is there?
So right now, we have one budgeted line item that goes for patching as well as for street reconstruction. And like I say, we have $85,000 in.
Okay, that's what, okay.
Where does something like the Post Oak Road pipe burst fall into? Is that an emergent, or is that a,
Enterprise fund? So what you're talking about for water line replacement?
well, street? It took out a whole bunch of street, didn't it? Yeah.
General maintenance.
Okay. So since he brought that up, is that something, as I see Gerald here, should we try to do the same thing for water and sewer? You know, put something aside, because it's always gonna be a growing.
Well, we actually do have in the budget, I don't remember the numbers, but it's like, there's 2 different funds that we transfer money to, the CIP and contingency fund.
Mm-hmm.
And those, are gonna have to grow in the future. It is, right now, I think we do $15,000 a month for one and $35,000 a month for the other. You know, so those funds are set aside for improvements, replacements and improvements.
Okay, it's kinda like the streets, they're just gonna continue to need work over time, so.
Did that complete your presentation?
That does.
Thank you, sir. All right, action items. Number 2, review and approve the minutes from the meeting on July 1, 2025. And that will be under your next tab.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from July 1.
So we have a motion made and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor, right hand. Motion made, seconded, and approved. Receive the monthly code enforcement report.
Okay, so for the month of July, we break down the cases by the type. And so in that first section there, you'll see we've issued 46 notices for trash and debris, 212 notices for high grass, and then 24 other violations, which again can be anything from a property maintenance violation, not pulling building permits, things of that nature. In that breakdown of those cases for this fiscal year, we've closed out and completed 248 of those cases. 14 are within the municipal court system, and then 20 remain open due to not meeting their deadline to be in the court system. And then again, you've asked us to keep the running total since we began proactive code enforcement in 2021. We currently sit at 1,396 cases completed, 19 remain in court, and then 20 are open. I will note to the commission before questions that we're actually going out for bid to get services for abatement to clean up some of these properties that are not compliant. So you'll start to see that court complaint number come down. And the way that works is they get billed For the work, they have 30 days. From that point, they'll receive a bill from the city. We simply just pass it on, and they have that time frame to pay it. If not, then a lien is put against their property.
How does that stand with other municipalities that you've,
That is standard practice.
so we're not, it's new for us, but not,
Yeah, I mean, the city's done abatement services before. Not in my tenure here. We've had pretty good compliance rate, but we used to use our own public works crew. And now, since the workload has increased for those individuals, we're having to go out for bid to
And
get somebody else.
I would not anticipate there's gonna be a large number of cases because of the fact they'll still receive notices. They'll still have the time frame necessary to abate the nuisance that they've been given notice about. And we've had pretty significant compliance. But if they don't, and you know, especially if it's a vacant property or sometimes it is difficult to track those people down or get them to respond, then we can go ahead and abate those. And what we'll do is we'll have a contract on file so that once it reaches that threshold where they have been given notice, they haven't complied, then we can contact the company that we have under contract to do the work, and they'll, under terms of the contract, they'll have so many days from the time we notify them to do the work for us. Once they get it done, then we'll get that number. So I would anticipate maybe 5% of the cases we would end up having to use them. Not that.
It's going to be small.
as a side note,
gonna
this
be
is
very rare.
an unusual year that you have tall grass in July and August.
It was like this last year as well. High grass season has lasted longer than normal, and so that's why you see that number so high. And it seems like we have another couple months of that at least.
And it's been, I mean, it was a busy month because there were, it looks like 292 total violations, notices issued for violations. And, you know, 1,300, or excuse me, about 1,400, you know, since we started keeping track. So it's that was a big, huge month.
Well, that's for the fiscal. I think
This
for
is for the year?
it's for the fiscal year. I think for the month we probably issued around 40 notices of violations. With that, I can field any questions that you may have about the report or anything code enforcement related.
Any questions? Thank you, sir. Number 4, receive the Development Services Department report.
Okay, I'm missing the report in my packet because that's my fault. I printed my own packet. But as far as permits this month, we have issued a total of 9 building permits, one of which was a demolition permit that's separate, 4 electrical permits, 1 HVAC permit, and 5 plumbing permits. So a pretty slow month as far for permits wise. We did have 1 new home, which came in at a value of about $136,554. That was in the Cornerstone subdivision. And with that, outside of those projects, roughly $63,000 in estimated value was put into Rockdale for the month through a smaller projects such as fencing and roofs for improvements. But a pretty slow month as far as building permits are concerned.
Has Cornerstone announced that they're gonna start another phase? I saw them working around the roadway out there.
They're working on phase 1D, 1E, and 1F. And so you will begin to see that dirt work begin. I'm sure it's already beginning. As far as pulling the permits from DR Horton's side, it is moving slowly. Because there's only 1 permit this month.
I did have a meeting with them, the folks from DR Horton last week, and they're watching closely. They do expect it to pick up with what's going on with T1 and Samsung in particular.
Any report on the other 2 projects? Any updates?
Nothing at this point right now.
Yeah.
Nothing to change.
Demolition, is it the house here on the highway? Where we at? There.
No, I don't believe so. I think we issued that permit maybe
Okay,
last
right.
month.
Okay.
Now that one on the highway, the Cortez house, we're waiting on the gas line to be retired. and then that will be demolished as soon as possible. I'm talking to the builder daily, and we're trying to get Atmos to do that before that structure falls in on itself.
Walk me through that project. Oh, that's new to us also, by the way, the tearing out of a gas line.
Well, any house demolition, you have to have your utilities disconnected. And so since that house had gas, you can't only just disconnect the gas, you actually have to retire the line that's going there. Just because the house is not going back, so they need to retire that line.
That's a new phrase, to retire
Yeah,
the gas line is.
and it's a key phrase. Anytime we have a home program applicant, we walk them through that, because if you just say to disconnect the gas, and they will not retire your line, because they're going to assume you're going to connect the gas at some point again.
I did see the trailer on Ackerman that had been the kind of contested for several years. They fixed.
Yes, they did. They did fix that, I believe, a few months ago.
After all that time, it took about 2 days.
Yeah.
And a handful of 2x4s and some sheetrock. After all that.
Yeah, and so just so the commission knows, substandard will be back up and running. It still is running, but we've slowed down just due to the workload of code enforcement. But this new budget proposes a position within the development services that will free up time to start getting after substandard structures.
That's a good report.
We're excited.
Any other questions? Are you through with your presentation?
As long I can field any questions you may have, but my presentation is done.
Any questions? Item 5, consider and take any necessary action on a recommendation to the city council for projects funded through the Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, for the fiscal year 2025-2026.
I wanted to give a brief introduction before Gerald comes and speaks to you guys. The reason that this is on your agenda today is because by charter, the Planning Commission actually is tasked with giving a recommendation to the city manager for capital improvement related items. It's supposed to be 150 days before the budget year. We just have found out about this requirement, and so we're going to go ahead and do it this year. You'll simply get a presentation from Gerald of what the plans are. Next year, this will look different because you'll be more involved in the process of actually making those recommendations. But with that, I'll let Gerald speak to you guys about what they have planned for the CIP funds.
Charlie, turn the lights back on.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
I'm sorry that I didn't come a little bit more prepared. We'd had this discussion a couple of weeks ago, and but as Ben said, the city charter directs the planning and zoning to give a recommendation to city manager so that we can include those in our capital improvements. I'm not sure, one of the questions I did have for Tim was, are we considering capital improvements from them to be new capital expenditures, or will that also include capital expenditures for like repair and resurfacing?
All of the above.
Okay, so what we've done is with Tim's forethought and seeing into the future has made it a very important step now that we do some financing so that we can get some $85,000 that was in this year's budget for street repairs. Didn't quite cover one street, and we still have a lot of holes and things. To your question, the blowout on the 8-inch main over on Post Oak the other day is just normally what we do is the water department will put it back so that it can dry. Once it dries, then there's a service order will be put out to streets, and the street department will come back behind them and patch it with cold mix. We'd like to see less chip seal. Not that we've given that up completely. We have a couple of sources that possibly could do a much better job than what we did with some of the streets, even though what we have done on multiple streets is still holding up pretty well. But our goal would be to take it out and put in new asphalt, a better base, and make sure it's that way. And that's what we would do on Redbud. I always want to say Rosebud because of the Dick Van Dyke Show, but that's not. But Redbud is definitely. I got a call last week from one of the residents that lives over there. He wasn't mad, wasn't upset. He was just saying, it's been this way for 31 years that he's lived there, and was wondering if we had any plans to do it. So I would certainly expect that would be on either this year's or next year's list of streets. We've asked the council for this year to give us some recommendations on streets they would like to see repaired, and that's still being developed. But since the charter directs the Planning and Zoning Commission to give us this list, we would like to work with you. I would like to work with you or my predecessor to work on what streets would be to
Priority.
priority.
And the scoring criteria that we had put together last year evaluated the streets based on their condition, but it also evaluated them based on the volume of traffic they carried and the amount of development that existed on that street. And so it kind of gave a very objective score for the streets. Unfortunately, probably a third of the streets all scored the same thing really, really high. And, so we're going to have to further prioritize from that standpoint. What I would personally like to do in regard to this particular effort is that we would update that list for y'all. If there's any changes, maybe give some additional data regarding dimensions and things like that, so we can come up with some rough estimates on cost of repairs, and then from the street portion of it, get a recommendation from you, like in February or March, not for this fiscal year, but for the next fiscal year on the streets. Then we can go through in the strategic planning and take that recommendation to council for the adoption of a 3-year plan. And then in addition to that, we'll be talking more about water and sewer, but that's on the streets. Yes, ma'am.
Define what the city uses for capital improvement definition. Is it cost, or is it the type of project? How would you define capital improvement?
How do you define CIP? Mm-hmm. So CIP just means capital improvement project.
Is it over a certain dollar amount? Like in businesses, we have capital improvements, and could be over $5,000.
You may want to go back on the history of CIPs and CIDs, where the money actually, how we're starting to get some, where we can address more issues, but.
And Tim, tell me if I'm wrong, but we have capital expenditures would be something anew, like if we're putting in a new well.
Okay.
But that might come out of CIP.
Okay.
Okay? But a capital improvement project could be street repairs, resurfacing, replace, whatever. They're adding another street where y'all have identified an area that the city should put something in, or potential work we could do for growth in an area that y'all see coming up. Same thing with water and sewer. We all know that there's more than likely going to be a significant continued growth in Rockdale and around Rockdale. And as y'all are made aware of those things, you can put that into, maybe this isn't going to happen in the next 6 months, but you can let us know at the end of December or 1st of January that we have, that this is on y'all's radar, and that we would need to potentially put it into the CIP planning for that year.
And the deadline.
From my perspective, from a CIP type funded projects, when you're purchasing purchasing infrastructure, whether it be a piece of equipment like a well or a pump or a motor, or a street or something like that, it is also tied to the duration. You know, if this is a piece of equipment that you're putting in that is anticipated to last 15 or 20 years, that would potentially, and then, you know, when it outgrows its life expectancy, has to be replaced, that could be purchased again. And there is a relationship to the dollar amount of that piece of equipment, because it's not gonna be something that's necessarily fundable out of a general operating
Right.
budget, you know, like just a.
And from a business standpoint, my background is industry, and a capital expenditure normally is something that you can
Depreciate?
depreciate.
Yes.
So, you know, it's still, we don't depreciate things, but it's the same type of thing. It's a big dollar item that has a lifetime, like Tim said. So we look forward to working with you, whenever y'all are ready, anytime. Just let us know.
And I have included in the budget, about $300,000 to do a comprehensive water and sewer master plan that will look at exactly what those types of issues, and come up with priorities from that standpoint. So hopefully you're involved in that process as well.
I had a nightmare the other day, and it is after our meeting that we had, and I was saying, why didn't we contract with the present tunneling going on and be having water lines put in next to the lines they're putting in? I said, they're finding the water connections anyway, so why don't we just have them putting a new water line down anyway,
There's some merit to that. But we do have more boring coming up as soon as we start the distribution, phase 2 of the distribution line. So, well, thank you, and let me know where I can.
And our
get with you.
recommendations are gonna have to be in, I know already this year, but in August, right? Is that what we determined, that at least by August, earlier maybe?
For this year, we're pretty much the ship's already sailed.
Yeah,
For the budget, but we need to start thinking about it and planning for it,
yeah.
for next year. So
Yeah.
this is more kind of educational, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. You have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I can send the planning commission the spreadsheet that myself and Justin worked on as far as street ratings. You'll see the ratings on there, the traffic volume, what we've noticed. We took pictures of every 100 blocks, so we'll send those to you guys. And then we actually have a sheet in there that we got preliminary numbers from an engineer of what it would cost, depending on the surface type and how you want to repair that. So that way you can plug away your numbers if you want to just see how much it would cost to fix a couple hundred blocks of whatever street. And you can begin to work on that, and then we'll probably have an item on the agenda probably in November or December to start talking about that, because I believe February we'll probably want to have something hashed out as a recommendation.
Say it again.
February is what I'll shoot for. I will go ahead and say that. That will give plenty of time for the budget process to take your recommendation and begin to work out that budget for the next fiscal year.
And by the way, the master plan that I was talking about earlier, it would not only assess our current existing infrastructure and, you know, its life expectancy and replacement and needs that we have right now, it'll also look at growth expectations as far as where that growth is kind of expected to take place, and to kind of plan for infrastructure to accommodate that growth. And then from that master plan will likely come a impact fee, adoption of an impact fee, so that new residents, as the city's population grows and grows, the existing residents don't have to bear the cost of that growth.
And some of that's actually covered in the master plan, the comp plan. So, I'm trying to give you a segue here, so let's take it this way. Number 6, conduct a workshop regarding the zoning ordinance.
While Shanna pulls that up, this is going to be a while if you want to head out.
Y'all have a good evening.
Yeah. Oh, you don't have to go now, Jared.
You know, as much as I really would like to stay,
I've talked to Doug and I think I've talked to Bud. I just want to tell the whole commission, a new House bill passed a few months back during their legislative session about home occupations. If y'all recall, we had a couple workshops and we put in place where you have to get a special use permit for when somebody has a home occupation. Well, the state legislator was one step ahead of us, and they said that you can't do that. So I'm going to give you an overview of the bill just so you know what they're saying, because you're going to see this come back up because we're going to have to amend the ordinance again. So what it says is, the first thing it does is it refers to any business as defined by the Business Organization Code. So I have to review that to see what they say. And then within that, it talks about home-based businesses means a business on a residential property that's ran by the owner or the tenant. And then it talks about something that's called a no-impact home-based business. And so what they mean by that is the total number of employees and clients don't exceed the municipal occupancy limit. They don't generate on-street parking or increase in traffic, which is in our regulations already. And then none of its activities are visible from the street. So if somebody runs a business exactly to those parameters, and they're going to be defined as a no-impact home-based business. And if they are a no-impact home-based business, then the city cannot require them to obtain any type of license or permit or any other approval for the business. And then we cannot also require them to do any type of zone change or install a fire sprinkler system.
Could you read that one more time, what you just said?
Everything, or which part?
Just that last sentence.
So we can't require them to rezone their property to be a home occupied, a no impact home based business. The only things that we can require is that they, of course, have to meet state laws. Their building has to meet the fire and building code, and then they can't do anything with any solid or hazardous waste. They can't pollute or have too much noise. Our noise ordinance will still take effect on them. And then they do throw us a bone where they say that we could limit businesses that sell any type of alcohol or illegal drugs if it's a structured sober living home or if it's a sexually oriented business.
Can you, the three criteria for determining whether it's a non-impact or no increased traffic and the employee?
So the three criteria is going to be that the total number of employees and clients do not exceed the occupancy limit of the property, which is high for the building code, unfortunately. They don't generate on-street parking or increase traffic. And then the last one is that none of its activities are visible from the street.
So how would it, if a business actually is selling anything, whether it's alcohol or sweaters, if they're selling something, people are coming there, unless they're doing it online, how would that not increase traffic? If people are coming there to buy something, is that automatically going to make them non-compliant with a non-impact zone?
That would be the difficulty of determining that, because I was telling Tim, the traditional single-family house averages about 10 trips a day, which a trip is yourself, if you get mail, and it's a one-way trip. So if you drive from home to work, that's one trip. You come back for lunch to your house, that's 2 trips. You leave from lunch back to work, that's 3 trips. The mail person comes and gives you your mail, that's 4 trips. They leave, that's 5 trips. You usually average about 10, is what they say. And so that would be the difficulty in determining that.
Times 3 with Amazon and FedEx. My house.
Yeah.
If people coming to do business, that would seem like it would increase that.
It would. It would seem it would. The unfortunate part about state legislatures, they tend to be pretty vague on those type of items, which makes it extremely hard to challenge.
So something that I've seen when I was looking up the details on this specifically was essentially if you have scheduled appointments and you can only see one person at a time, it's seen as like benign traffic. Whereas like if you have a constant flow and you can't actually tell somebody how many people are potentially going to be in shop at a time, then that would be increasing the flow.
Well, you know, our codes require that they're never open. So it would all be appointment only. And so then it would be determined that you should schedule your appointments so where you would not increase that traffic to a degree. Because, I mean, if you're scheduling appointments every 5 minutes and somebody comes in and buys a sweater from you, I mean, you're obviously increasing that traffic. But if you have an every 2-hour appointment, objectively, you're probably not increasing the traffic by that much to the point where they would let it go. But our regulations are still in place as far as, the business still can't look like a business. It has to look like a home. I mean, those items are still in effect. We just cannot require them to come in and tell you about their business so that way they get a special use permit from you. That's all that this is taking away from us. So we'll just have to amend the allowed use table to take away the requirement.
One high volume one, daycare is exempt from this, like your home care, or not?
We have that in our home occupation allowance, but we have different regulations for them, if I can recall, and I'll have to pull those of what we require for
'Cause,
those type of operations.
I mean, you can, 10 families taking kids there, dropping them off, picking them up could exponentially increase the traffic flow.
And that's your expert on daycares? Because I'm sure there's a limit of how many you can have before you're going to have to register and you start
gotta
opening.
register for any.
Okay.
You have to have a license for, I believe, any.
So that's one thing is I'm kind of confused. I'll have to look at the legislation more carefully, but I don't really see who or how this is doing anything as far as like changing anything for a specific business.
Takes away the permit.
Man, this is recorded. The state plays a fun game with cities that just kind of takes away our abilities to regulate certain things. This is just an item that they don't want the city to regulate farther than they should. So they're saying that they don't want you to require a permit anymore because some people are charging permits and they're making money and they don't want that. So
You can still regulate it with signage and stuff like that, though, correct?
that's right. Our regulations still apply as it's got to look like a home. So you can't go and put a huge sign in your yard that says this is Daniel's Daycare in a home. It would still look like a home. If you drove by it, it looked like somebody's living there, but maybe they're just running a daycare operation on the side or a sweater company on the side. But that's typically how the state will do. They like to limit the city's power, so it usually doesn't change that much. It just takes away from cities' regulations. And we'll get into that as I get in this presentation. There were some troubling bills that almost passed that we'll talk about. But to get back in this presentation, I just want to let the Planning Commission know about that. The goal of this today is just a discussion. We're going to you'll get comprehensive plans from us. You can also find it on our website. The comp plan has called us to every year give an update about how we're implementing the plan or working towards implementing the plan. And in that, you'll see there's a section that has recommended steps to take. And in that, it talks about our zoning ordinance, which is why we're going to talk about it today. It wants us to be a little bit more inclusive of different housing types. And so I am going to get into this presentation. I'll set up the parameters. We'll learn new things together today. And then you can interrupt me at any point to get more details. But this is just a discussion. There's no items that are going to be following this. It's just going to be direction from the Planning Commission of how you want to move forward, however this conversation goes today. So within that, I want to talk about the types of zoning because we need to understand that before we get into how we're going to change our zoning, potentially. So the first is what's called Euclidean zoning or conventional zoning. That is the most standard zoning that you're ever going to find. If you look at 10 cities, 9 out of 10 of them are going to have this type of zoning. This is the zoning we have, and essentially what it does is it breaks these down by uses. So you have your residential uses, you have your commercial uses, and then you have your industrial uses, and then any and all in between. But they're segregated uses, so you won't see commercial next to residential and so on and so forth. There is performance zoning that's a little bit, it's within our codes to an extent. What this means is it's zonings that have restrictions on how many vehicle trips you can have, what your density is, and what the noise is that's allowed. And when we talk about density, there's a slide that I explain this on, but density usually means how many units per acre there are. is how dense you would allow it. So if you said on a zoning that you'd only allow 8 to 12 dwelling units per acre, then that would be something that a planning commission would look at when you get these zoning applications in to build homes or change their zoning. There is negotiated zoning, which we also have an element in. Most people do. Just because Euclidean zoning is so strict on what you can and can't do, there needs to be an element to negotiate out of that. Cornerstone did it, and Republic Ridge did it. It's called a planned unit development. It's essentially its own zoning ordinance, where they tell you, you know, maybe we want to do smaller lots, maybe a little bit more dense of a development than you would necessarily allow with your zoning ordinance. So they essentially create their own zoning ordinance. They'll usually give you more incentives. So what Cornerstone did is they dedicated more parks and more green space to have smaller lots. It's usually a give-take relationship. There's benefits in that because it allows fluidity. The problems with it is it doesn't give a set standard for the developer or city staff during that negotiation process, which just causes some uncertainty.
One of the things, though, you can do with that, because the state legislature has said that you can't require like certain types of building materials. In a PUD, though, you can negotiate that if they agree to do that. So if you wanted to say, hey, we want to have brick and masonry facades on the front of the building, you could include that as part of your negotiated standard.
Yeah, I know with Cornerstone, I think we negotiated their original garage layout was not appealing. And so that was one of the items we negotiated with them to fix that a little bit.
So would a variance fall under negotiated zoning if someone requested a variance on their zoning?
It could fall under that. It's not necessarily the intention. Variance is kind of a separate item that you'll usually get granted due to an existing condition usually. It's not a self-created condition. And zoning is usually a self-created. You're going to come in with a development, and so you need to negotiate to make that development a reality because your codes don't allow it.
And the variance typically addresses a single lot or
Right.
lot's development rather than a zoning area for a new subdivision is typically multiple sites. And typically you wouldn't do a planned unit development for a single lot development.
And then the last type of zoning is form-based. This is a new idea. It's new within the last decade. The benefits of it, it's a lot more fluid. But the way that form-based typically works is you take a section or a corridor of your city. I'll use Hutto as an example. If you ever drive Hutto just a little bit off the highway, I don't know what those roads are called, but they have home-based businesses, but they're not livable structures. They're actually just businesses that are designed as homes. That would be something as a form base where you could have a community of these residential structures that have a certain characteristic, and you would allow maybe a more flexible use of a commercial that wouldn't create a lot of traffic, but it fits in with the neighborhood. It's a new idea. If you look at a lot of different communities, a lot of different ones do it differently. If this is something that the Planning Commission is interested in implementing in sections or in small portions, we can look at Taylor. Taylor just went through this and did a good job with theirs. They went to actually just a straight form-based approach. What I would recommend to the Planning Commission when we start getting into this is we would do what's called a hybrid approach, where we keep our Euclidean zoning and then maybe implement certain elements of form-based zoning within that to be a little bit more inclusive.
So with mixed-use zoning district, is that still could that still be considered a Euclidean if you had a particular specific criteria for mixed use?
You could, yeah. So Euclidean could have mixed uses within that. They typically don't, but you can. You could have a mixed-use district. We almost have one. It's our central area district. It almost acts as a mixed-use district because it allows for a livable space at the top of the unit and a business at the bottom. So you can have it within your Euclidean code, and again, this is just a discussion. We can go any which way you guys want to go. where we could keep Euclidean and we could do what Tim says and maybe just implement a mixed use in certain areas. A good mixed use would be along Ackerman. If you ever drive along Ackerman, you'll see businesses that mix with residential. They exist on the ground as a mixed use, so you would essentially honor that in the zoning code and bring them back into conformance. A goal of mine while I'm here, just to share with the Planning Commission, is a lot of our city is out of conformance due to our zoning map, and I would like to have a new zoning map at some point that brings people in conformance for insurance purposes, so that way they know they can rebuild their structures. So again, I talk about the hybrid zoning. Cities are starting to go towards this hybrid zoning approach because of the concept of missing middle housing, which we'll talk about later on, to be more inclusive. If you look at any city, they'll say that no two are the same, and so that's going to be something with us. You know, we'll have to amend how we want to if we want to, and we probably won't look like anybody else around us when we do that. It's a very flexible approach. So which applies to us, as I talked about, we're conventional, and then we also use planned unit developments to help with the flexibility needs of our zoning code. The advantages of conventional zoning is they're most commonly frequently used, so when a developer comes in, they're very familiar with how that zoning works. It controls your development scale. And then it implements things such as setbacks, lot size requirements, building heights, things of that nature. The disadvantages is it doesn't regulate design at all. It segregates your uses, and then it could cause excessive restrictions, which we are at that point. We're a little bit outdated in our code. We still require pretty large lot sizes for residential structures, and then our building setbacks are a little bit larger than the norm of how the industry is moving with building. So what the diagnostic report recommends is they're essentially just recommending us to have a holistic zoning strategy. Essentially how I was telling you guys, maybe we do a little bit of both. They also say that we could just go the route of being more inclusive in every zoning category instead of just saying a mixed use district on its own.
Tim, where you came from, what was your typical lot size?
I've had a lot of different situations, but in most recently, I believe it was 50 foot was the typical lot size. But generally, you know, when you're using Euclidean zoning, you have like R1, R2, R3. R1 is the least dense, and so it might be 75 feet. R2 would be smaller, might be 60 feet, and R3 would be 50 feet. And then R3 could potentially also have some multifamily component to it, or R4 could have single family and multifamily mixed together.
This is one of our dings in our
So,
comp plan.
and I think all of our residential zoning are 75,
70, and
70?
yeah, I believe they're all 70.
and do we just have one, or do we have R1 or?
We have R1, R2, and R3, but it remains the same. The way it's worded, if I can remember right, is like R2 would allow for a duplex, and it says 35 foot for each structure, each portion of that duplex, so it's 70. Something along those lines. I have to look. But as we start to dig into how we want to amend it, we'll go section by section and make determinations on what we want to see, what we want to change. To get into form-based zoning, though, there are advantages to it. It does address your site design. It gives you greater flexibility. And then it applies well to certain contexts, such as our downtown. It would apply well to any diverse neighborhood, as I mentioned, on Ackerman, where there's already commercial and residential. That's where it would apply the best to. Not necessarily, you can apply it to residential only, but it doesn't necessarily have to fit there. The disadvantages is, again, it's a very new concept. And so if you get a developer in and you have a form-based code, they're not going to be very familiar with it. And your staff may not be as well, because it is a more complex code to interpret and handle because it's not rigid. That's the good thing about Euclidean zoning, how rigid it is. It's very black and white on what you can and can't do. A form-based code would be not as black and white.
And right now we have Euclidean plus planning development opportunities.
That's right, yeah. So we operate under the Euclidean zoning, and we have a planned unit development opportunity if it's needed.
And
Yeah.
that plan, any planned unit development starts with a base zoning, either R1, R2, R3, and then it expands from there with its flexibility.
Yeah.
And then with the plan, you can, like, I know when we did that, we had to pick businesses like businesses. You couldn't just say, okay, this is gonna be zoned for a auto body shop. It had to be like businesses that would fit into that building, correct?
Yeah, with yours specifically, the goal with yours was to get you into conformance, but to protect your neighbors from a heavier business usage that came
Right.
in. So that's why we worked with you to have specific standards. For others, it will be that way typically. As Tim said, you have a base zoning. So we'll use Cornerstone as an example. They came in with a residential 1 zoning. So everything that they're going to do applies to that ordinance unless they specify differently. So I'll use the example, they have smaller lot sizes and they have different building setbacks. They also provided a different landscaping standard, but they did not, we'll just say that maybe they didn't provide what their parking requirements would be. Well, then their parking requirements fall back to what our normal standard is. So whatever you don't list in your ordinance automatically falls to what your base zoning is. Does that make sense? That is your catch-all. So that way they don't have to list everything in that ordinance. You have a base ordinance that you're working off of, and you're essentially just changing what you need to make your development work.
Can you elaborate on the parking ordinance, like for Cornerstone, like what is
Well,
that?
Cornerstone meets the parking. I believe they have their own parking standard, which I think they have 1 off-street and then 1 on-street, 2 off-street, I believe, if I remember the ordinance correctly. We typically require 2 off-street spaces for any new development that comes in.
So here in town, is it basically the same, or is it different in?
It is. It's a zoning, and so a lot of the town, we got into this when we were talking about parking on grass, is what you would consider legal non-conforming. They built their structure before your zoning ordinance existed. So therefore, they are not in compliance with your new standards, but they are what's called grandfathered in. So they can continue to act as is at whatever their parking was at the time. For most of them, there probably wasn't a parking standard at the time. And because we found that a lot of people don't even have driveways, which is a requirement now. If you build in the city, you have to put in an improved driveway. And it has to contain 2 off-street parking spots.
Or if you modify a duplex into a single home, you become non-conforming if you don't go through the process.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's parameters within that you have to come back into conformance. So you can operate as a legal non-conforming. Certain things as you can't, I believe it's 50% that you can't invest in your property more than what it's worth. You'd have to bring it into compliance. You can't add any square footage to your property. We have to bring it to the current zoning ordinance. So there's parameters in place that brings you back into compliance. As far as the diagnostic report, it recommends, as I was stating earlier, that we do some type of combined approach, whether we want to just implement a little bit of form-based zoning within certain districts, or it even goes to the length of saying maybe do it with every conventional district and just add elements of a form-based zoning in each. That's something that we'll determine at a later date. This is going to be many workshops, just to let you guys know, and I will say this could lead to not very many changes, or it could lead to a lot of changes. It's going to be the commission's recommendations to the city council. And so I haven't tasked the city council with this because this is this board's responsibility. And so what I'd like to happen is we maybe work it out for at least 4 to 6 months and then work with the city council if that's something they want to see. Because by the comp plan, they've said they've wanted it. And so it's our job to start implementing the comp plan.
They're the ones that approved it, bought it, sealed it. They're supposed to read it, but
So within that, I want to talk about, before we start amending the zoning ordinance, we really need to understand how the city operates and what our existing land uses are, so that way when you change something, you know what you're really affecting. And you'll see this, I have these in your printouts. It should be the second page, existing land uses. So we have about 13% of our city that's in the commercial, 51% is residential, 12% is institutional, 15% is vacant, 3% of our parks, and then about 6% is in agriculture. And then for those that don't know, there's two different types of maps that are within the comp plan that the city references. So this is the existing land use map. Those color designations are incorrect, but just know that those represent your existing uses. So the yellow is residential and so on. I'll probably send you guys an email of what the colors should be, because they do not match the legend. But that is how your city currently operates. Now, as far as Tim mentioned, we're going to do another study that will probably give us some growth projections. I will note that the study from the comp plan, usually you use the Texas Water Development Board for your growth projections, but however, when this comp plan was still going on, they actually had our population decreasing by a little bit, which Cornerstone was already in by that point, so it was obvious that that's not going to be the case. And if you go by the numbers of the approved subdivisions so far and the potential of another one that's in discussion, you're probably talking about per household is usually 2.4 to 2.7 persons per household, roughly about 2,500 more citizens in your city when those are all built out. But as far as the projections go, they have different growth rate scenarios. Obviously, the 6.2% is the fastest growing scenario. When I ran the numbers of those subdivisions being built out, you would assume that they'd be built out by the year 2030, most likely. So our current population is somewhere in the 5,000s. So if you add 2,500 to that, you're kind of close to your 4% growth rate currently. If that goes how the census would say it would go. And the reason I'm showing you guys this is first to familiarize yourselves with the comp plan and why we're going through these changes, because Rockdale is growing and we need to be ahead of the curve than behind the curve.
Amen.
And to show the need of why we want to make these changes. Because there's going to have to be housing for these new individuals. So we have what's called a future land use plan. It's an important tool that we use. It allows for the planning of infrastructure, as Gerald and Tim mentioned in their CIP presentation. What a future land use plan will do is they'll tell you where your growth is most likely going to happen, so that way you can start to prepare your infrastructure, where you want to plan for your streets to go, where do we need to upsize water and sewer lines, and where do we need to extend them to. The future land use plan is made up of two elements. It's made up of the future land use map, and then it has its own categories. So this is the map.
Excuse me. On this 2025 that you just had up there, where are we? Are we at 5734, or where are we at 2025?
Well, so the census hasn't come out with its new numbers, so we're just going to do a base projection. Which just use the even number of 5,000 to make it easy. If say we have 5,000 population as of when the developments began in 2022, and they've built out 70 structures at Cornerstone, then that would put you at about an additional 200 people.
Yeah.
And that's the assumption that people aren't moving from town to Cornerstone and leaving houses vacant. That is all an assumption. But the census should be sending out their updates for the 2030 soon. And so we should start getting some preliminary numbers. But I project that we're probably somewhere in between the 2.5% and 4% growth rate right now with how these subdivisions are going. But this all just depends how fast they build these out. Because right now, a lot of it's contingent on how Samsung's operating, and I know Samsung slowed down for a little bit, which caused Cornerstone to slow down for a little bit. But if they start to ramp things up, then you'll start to see those subdivisions build out pretty quickly, as well as probably new subdivisions and new commercial following that are just going to follow those subdivisions. This is the future land use map.
If they're being really ambitious, Charlie, we don't see a whole lot of growth. You'll see 2,000 or so at optimum level, 2,000 a year, till you get to 2030, and then you're almost double.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is all contingent on how SLR's handling their stuff, which they're moving pretty quickly, and then how Samsung is, because that's going to be your two biggest growth factors outside of the natural growth patterns that you may have already. Because there was an anomaly that kind of happened after COVID where people realized that they can begin to work from home and move to smaller rural towns that are cheaper to live in and work from home than having to pay the higher rent prices or property tax prices in Austin and things of that nature. And so you've seen a lot of people moving down to smaller towns like ours as well. So this is the future land use map. The colors are correct on this one, so you can refer to your legend on this one. This is essentially the map that the city council, the citizens, and staff worked on to determine where do you want your growth to be, how do you foresee that happening. And so if you'll see, in the orange is the core neighborhood. That's existing residential. The yellow is what's going to be probably your new residential. And then outside of that, they have on the east side of town where more of your employment and industrial is going to go. I know in that conversation there was an industrial park out there that Jim was working on at the time on the east side, which is why they designated it that way, because they figured if that went in, that more industrial is probably going to follow out in that area. And then your employment range is also on that end. And then your green is your green space, your agricultural uses.
What was the blue? The light blue?
Fed by regional node.
Yeah, that's,
So the blue is gonna, so the dark blue is your mixed use. The light blue, the regional node, what they mean by that is your local commercial uses. Is what they mean. And then your employment is maybe more heavier industrial uses, or not industrial, but heavier commercial uses that have more employment opportunity. And so in that, again, the future land use plan has the map, which what we just looked at, and then these are the categories within that those colors represent. And you'll see this in the comp plan as we talk about it, of what they recommend as far as each different land use may have, what they would allow, at what density they would allow. And so let's get into what density, intensity, and scale means. So the density, again, is the number of dwelling units. It's usually measured by the acre. The intensity is going to be, for our purposes, the lot percentage that's covered. So think of, we have standards already for impervious cover that we would allow on a lot. That's what the intensity would refer to. And then
Both building and parking lot.
that's right. Anything that, if you think of a big commercial building, they may go more stories in the air, but they have a bigger parking lot area. However much of that lot that they cover, whether it's their building or parking lot, is going to be the intensity of that. It's not just the building. And then the scale is the height of the building. And so this is just a configuration that's in the comp plan to show you the different ways that that can affect it. So you'll
That's
see.
page 45, if you're following along.
You'll see here, so they have 4 single-family lots on a block. So they have 4 dwelling units within this acre, and at 50% coverage at 1 and 2 stories. That's one way to do it. You could go smaller single-family units on a block that share a courtyard that have 6 dwelling units, but they're still at the same coverage, and they're at 1 story. And then you can come down here, maybe you, in a different zoning district, you allow more dwelling units per acre, so you have a small multifamily building unit, 4 units per floor with a park space. And when they say park space, to not get confused, they're talking about green space, not parking. It'd be 12 dwelling units an acre at 50% coverage. So these are just different examples of how your density and intensity are going to affect. So when you implement that in your zoning code, you can have these different development types that still hit that 50% that you allow.
Where does parking come in at?
Parking would be within your ordinance. You still want to regulate your parking, and that's going to come into that percentage that we talk about. So that intensity or that coverage for how we're going to determine it, parking would apply. So most likely in these scenarios, these are really straightforward scenarios. They're making the assumption that they're parking on the street. In our world, they're not going to be. They'll have a driveway, which would play into your density. Intensity. So I want to get into this. The reason why I brought this to your attention is the legislature at the federal level is working on bipartisan bills to help with housing. That's how big of a crisis we're in right now, that they're on a bipartisan level on this issue. So there's a thing called missing middle housing, where cities that have Euclidean zoning tend to have that. If you ask any city, most cities in their top 5 are going to tell you that they have a housing problem. It's going to be somewhere on that list. And so the intention is for us to be a little bit more inclusive on these different type of structures that would still keep the aesthetic of what makes Rockdale Rockdale, but allows for a different type of housing for maybe new home buyers that are just now starting a salary that wants to get into purchasing a property and maybe moving their way up to a bigger sized home, to retirees that no longer want to maintain or can maintain a larger house, that want to move down and scale down. There are positives when you talk about missing middle housing. They embrace your small town character while meeting your housing needs if they're done correctly. They can minimize the displacement of the multi-generational housing, which is what we just talked about, new home buyers, people that want to retire. There's a market for each individual. They could be used as buffers between high and low density. They promote incremental change that doesn't alter your neighborhood, and then they help provide more affordable housing options.
How different are they? Are we talking like the contain? Oh,
That's what this slide's about. So this is in your comp plan. Let me get to it on my page so I can read a little bit. So there's different type of housings that they're going to note here. So you can go as far as you can have a single family detached house. You can have a duplex. You could go triplex, fourplex. You could have courtyard apartments, bungalow courts, townhouses, multiplexes, a live workspace, or mid-rise, high-rise apartments. There's also accessory dwelling units that cities are starting to implement more often, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But those are just some range of options that aren't necessarily allowed by right in Euclidean zonings due to the square footage requirements that cities usually have of structures. I know we've run into it here where people may want to go less than 1,000 square foot, and in our zoning code you can't do that. And so it's a pretty straightforward no as far as that. So you're probably going to see this in your packet, and this is going to look like it means nothing to you, and it will by the time we're done, I promise. We'll slowly break that down. I'll go over it very quickly, but we're not going to dig deep into this today. On the left-hand side is designations in your future land use plan. In the middle is what our current zoning is, and so you'll see the arrows pointing at each other. What that means is there's certain elements within each zoning classification that could apply to that district. And then the final is we have a diagnostic report that says you guys should implement these zoning districts. I talked with Doug about this. They're named a little funny on some of them, so we'll definitely be changing that if we implement that. But they all translate into that zoning district. So you can see if we go over this big overhaul, which again, we may or may not, you could see that there could be a potentially big change happening to be a little bit more inclusive and combine some of these zoning districts for more inclusivity. So with that, we're not going to go over this. I just wanted you to be aware of it because I worked on it, and I wanted you to at least have a ballpark of what staff is seeing that could change. Again,
And it helps with the developers if we're on the same dialect, if our terms are what is the same terms in other cities, and
I'll tell you, cities use a lot of different terms. When you get outside of Euclidean zoning, cities use a lot different terms. Which, if we change it, we would be using different terms. That would be a negative for them, but it would be you would have to change it. What Taylor did, which I thought was pretty good, is they went on a numbering system. So I believe they call it residential 1. And then they go 2 and 3. I mean, it may not be residential, but they use a numbering system. And the higher the number is, the more intense the use is. And so it starts as the number 1, which is your very non-dense residential units. And then it goes to number 5, which turns into commercial with the potential of higher residential uses such as multiplexes and apartments. So you can change those names. We can change it however we want to make it more simplified. That's how they did it.
Question.
Uh-huh.
You brought up Taylor. Taylor has a bunch of small, super small homes, and maybe they're old and just remodeled, but are their zoning stipulations pretty much the same as ours, or is it?
Taylor changed their zoning, so they do a form-based approach. So they're a lot more on the aesthetic of how those look. And I'd have to look on what their structure size requirement is, if they even specify that. Because some form-based zone codes they'll tell you that it has to be minimum of 800 square foot to whatever. And some won't say anything at all.
Their charts are very easy to follow, though. If you're here, you can do this, this, or this. You cannot do this, this, or this.
They have a very good land use code, and that's something that I would hope we would implement at least a small portion of that they have in there, and I'll show you guys here in a future meeting.
Not Euclid?
Because they allow more uses. So I'll show you the charts that he's referring to. They're very easy to read, but it's almost, you ever seen a multiple choice test when you were in school and you had to fill in the dots of which ones you're answering, and it's like down a line? It's like that, but it's very easy to read. And you'll see in there that they allow different home types in certain districts, and then sometimes they allow light commercials, which that's why you get out of the Euclidean standard and they go to the more form-based.
By the way, Ben, if you really want to get some press, if we can build a 150-story building, we can surpass the one in Austin now. And they have lots of press releases on the tallest building in Texas.
One more question. You can go ahead if you want to respond to that.
I think he's ready for me to retire. Where you at?
So do Taylor have any HOA places in Taylor?
I don't know that for certain. I'd imagine they probably do on their, usually any new subdivision
housing.
that comes in will always have an HOA now. I don't know if the older parts of Taylor, they most likely probably didn't. They're probably going to be like how we're turning into, where our existing city doesn't have HOAs, and then new subdivisions came in, they have HOAs. I would imagine certain parts of Taylor probably had deed restrictions, but deed restrictions aren't enforced by the city. Because Rockdale has deed restrictions. I know in the Skiles area, they don't allow for a certain percentage of the home, I think, has to be some sort of brick or masonry, which the city doesn't get into. But those are deed restrictions.
Now, Cornerstone, their HOA?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Cornerstone's an HOA. If Republic Ridge comes to fruition, they will have an HOA. I imagine the new subdivision that's in the works would be an HOA as well. It's a typical thing. It's a lot more rare to see someone come in with a subdivision and not have an HOA.
And the reason is the same reason you do zoning in the first place, is to protect their investment, because they don't want to have somebody come in and do something that negatively impacts their ability to sell the lot next door.
Leave your trash cans out by the road.
Yeah, HOAs get pretty fun. I had one that I knew of, this subdivision, and they had a certain type of rock color that you had to have in your flower beds. And so someone put in a white rock, but it had to be a tan or darker. I can't remember how they worded it, so they had to take all their white rock out and put in a darker rock. So it just, it can be as strict as an HOA wants to be, or they can be as loose as they want to be.
Gonna get a new front door for my house, but I have to clear it with HOA first.
Yeah, that's a normal one. I know they also go after, like, if you keep your decorations up for too long or you do them too early. The state legislator did take away HOA's abilities to send letters to residents for having yellow grass when there's a drought restriction. I live in an HOA, so I got a letter. We're under a drought restriction, and they sent me a letter for having yellow grass when we couldn't water the grass.
Send them a cease and desist.
So, anyways, that's a positive from the state legislator, in case anybody from the state's listening. Okay, so we're eventually going to break this down individually. I'm going to skip past this section. I'm not going to keep you guys for too much longer. I just want to talk about accessory dwelling units. But what you'll see is we'll essentially go over a slide where we'll talk about these items, and then I'll break it down further where we'll talk about it in more detail. But I wanted to talk to you guys about accessory dwelling units. So this is something that I want you guys to put on your radar, because we had this discussion right before I started, and I heard it did not go very well, and times have changed since then, and so maybe you would be more willing to hear this out now. But what an accessory dwelling unit is, it's a smaller independent dwelling unit that's located on the same lot.
Doesn't have to be a dwelling unit, right?
Well-
Accessory structure could be a garage or a.
But this is about dwelling units.
Okay.
So accessory structures, yes, there is a key determination of what Tim says. So an accessory structure is, think of like a storage shed where you store your lawnmower and your tools in. That's an accessory structure. An accessory dwelling unit is a accessory structure that's livable. So somebody would actually stay in there. They have, deemed by the code, they have put a kitchen in there, which means a stovetop, and it is a livable structure separate from the main unit on the property. So it's usually smaller than the main home on the lot. It could be attached or detached, and there's a graphic that I'll show you of the different types of accessory dwelling units that you can have.
Do we currently have that?
We don't. We don't. And the reason we don't, I'll say it like this. There are several properties that I believe have someone living in an accessory unit, but by the code, it's not a dwelling unit because they don't have a kitchen, which is a stovetop. Did that make sense? So,
Prevent somebody from parking a trailer or converting a garage.
yeah. Now, as far as, it brings variety of housing options. These are the different types that you can have. Of course, you can have the most standard, which is the detached one. You can have an attached that could have been a garage at some point that maybe you converted, or you just expanded the unit and you now have a detached. You can have an upper level. You can have a lower level if you have a basement. You could do above garage, or you can do a garage conversion. There's different ways to do accessory dwelling units. You can regulate them based on what you want to see and what you don't want to see. I would imagine you probably don't want to see the above garage one for the most part. You'd probably want to keep it to where it's an attached, detached, or a garage conversion most likely. But this is just something for you guys to start thinking about. I wanted to talk about why I wanted to bring this to you guys. There was 3 different bills from the legislature that all did not pass, but it's concerning that there's 3 different ones. So this seems to be a pretty important thing for the legislature, and I imagine we're going to see it in the next session, which is 2 years from now. The first one is House Bill 878. They prohibited cities from imposing any lot size, density, or setback requirements for accessory dwelling units. House Bill 1779 allowed property owners to just bypass your zoning regulations and build an ADU. And then the last one was the most reasonable one of the 3. It allowed ADUs anywhere that you would allow for single-family housing or duplexes. And they were a little bit more flexible in allowing cities to at least regulate them. And so I wanted to bring it to the Planning Commission as an idea, because it seems as if in 2 years from now we'll be having this discussion again, but it may be a different discussion that they've passed something that might be detrimental. So it may be beneficial for the city to start looking into this, to at least we allow it, so that way we can get some built to a standard that we would like to see it at before the state just implements something and says, you know, you can do whatever you want. Because the middle one, the 1779, was the most problematic because in that one, if I can recall, they bypassed every zoning regulation. You couldn't require them to meet any building setbacks. You couldn't require them to put more parking in for having more residents there. It was a troublesome bill.
So once you establish something as a city, those bills don't override that, correct?
They do. State law supersedes cities. Now, the reason I'm bringing
If they,
the reason I bring this up is if we have an applicant come in and I tell them, no, you can't do accessory dwelling units, then in 2 years, if they pass something that says you can do whatever you want, they're going to come back in 2 years and they're going to say, I'm back for my accessory dwelling unit, and I have to allow it. If you at least put standards into place of what you allow and what you don't allow, maybe
okay,
you
that-
get
I think more that's what I meant. You can't not allow it, but you can have standards for it then.
We can currently not allow it right now.
Right.
Right now, we don't allow it, and we have the authority not to allow it. But,
Okay.
like, even in number 3, they're saying that we have to allow it, even though we can regulate it.
Yeah.
So the idea, another thing is if we have somebody comes in and wants to do something, and we just say, no, we don't allow it, they go to their legislator and complain.
Yes.
And we end up with something like this, whereas if we do allow it and regulate it appropriately, then potentially they can do what they have to.
Because you don't think 1779, the version of that will pass, correct?
Well, all of these did not pass.
Right.
The legislative session is done, and these bills
Right.
have. But
But if it comes back, that one probably would not pass.
The way they're chipping away
I
at that
would-
is, some of that is a code enforcement really, and some of that's under zoning. And they're chipping from 2 different directions, trying to take city out of the picture.
I would hope that the legislatures work with cities to adopt if they want to pass a state law to require these, that there would be some outreach to make that work for both parties. That traditionally has not been the case, unfortunately. But as far as those bills, I would hope we wouldn't. If we see another bill, I hope it's like bill number 3. If we're going to see one, because that's the most least restrictive on cities to at least allow us to have some sort of regulations with that. But it's always troublesome when you see a bill on the same topic multiple times. And so that's why I'm bringing it to your attention that maybe we start to begin to regulate this item so that way, as Tim said, maybe they don't go to your legislature because they got the accessory dwelling unit that they asked for, but they got it at a standard that we can at least regulate on how their parking would be, what their building setbacks would be. I would imagine you would go with this, how we do accessory structures currently, that it would be a similar type of an appearance to the main structure in a way. It can get as detailed as you want. That's why I bring it to your attention for thoughts, because when we start doing this zoning ordinance workshops, that will be something that I recommend, at least for your residential district, is to begin to allow that with certain standards.
And we need to be there before 2 years, right?
That would be the hope. It doesn't have to be that way. I hope that this workshop doesn't take any longer than 6 months to where we hash out a plan, because this is something that's going to take council approval, and we're just their advisory board. But this is something that we at least need to be on the ball with, to at least present something to them. That way you're at least looking at your comp plan and potentially implementing that.
Yeah, I'm committed that we'll be ahead, or at least at pace with the comp plan. And I want proof that we worked on it, so that's my personal desire.
Well, and if we look at the zoning ordinance in general, you know, the things that the zoning ordinance regulates are parking, setback, intensity and density, use of the property, height. You know, those are the things that, I mean, and there's more things that the zoning ordinance addresses specifically. But for instances like this, you know, what are the 2 or 3 things that are most important that we would need to regulate if we want to allow for multi-unit,
Accessory dwelling units.
accessory dwelling units?
I don't know if this will fall under that category, but speaking in, looking ahead a couple years, with what is coming as far as construction and everything, in an event that the hotels are full at some point, some owners or house owners, I guess typically rent house owners would use each of their rooms in a house for like Airbnbs. Is there any cap on that, or?
So there's two things that regulate that. The first is there's an occupancy limit on structures it's all based on square footage, and there's a certain square footage requirement that's allowed per person, that they have to have their own space essentially. And then there is communities like ours will regulate short-term rentals, is what we call them, to where if you're renting out rooms for, if there's a construction project for 3 months, you're going to rent out your room or your house as an Airbnb type of operation or something similar, then you would fill out a form, let the city know about it. Most of them are going to have a hot tax that they'll have to pay because they're going to be these rental units, so they'll have to provide that information. So, but it's regulated in multiple ways is the answer to that.
Are you familiar with when they use it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
hotel
it'd be
occupancy
like
tax.
the same, like, the hotel's paying their tax because of how many people stay there, go back into the.
Yeah. It's a similar function. They get their own hotel occupancy tax number that they would provide on the form that they're running it as that operation, and then there would be standards within that. And it's a yearly application that they pay a fee for, as long as they're going to keep renting that property out.
Do you know if we have any Airbnbs in city limits yet?
We have had
We had two.
a few.
I know there's 2 or 3 in Cameron.
Yeah,
So I think there'd be some here too.
I believe there are at least a few.
In the city limits? I don't know.
It was 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, right here by the elementary school was one. I don't know their existing status, but there was one, right?
Well, I know I've talked to a few that wanted it, have thought about it, so I know the idea is at least going around for some.
Most people use the service though, right? I mean, they're using like the management company to do it for them, advertise it, book it, and everything like that.
Yeah, usually you'll have an agent, some sort of agent that you hired. You'll probably have like a couple properties that you'll hire them to manage for you. Some manage it on their own. It just depends what your scale of operation is.
Looking on Airbnb, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the city of Rockdale.
So it was about
Yeah, beware that one that says situated close to the river and all that other stuff, those. Yeah, well, no, there was an RV, it's Rockdale RV Park or something that had some crazy advertising. It's like, what?
Now that you say that, I do have one more thing to tell the Planning Commission. It doesn't necessarily relate to you guys, but just so you're on the same page, we are updating our flood ordinance, our flood prevention ordinance, to come into standard. The last update it saw was in 1996, if you're curious. And so we are going to update it to come into standard. Some small changes off the top of my head. We're going to put in standards for RVs that are within the floodplain.
Haha, yeah.
And then we're also going to change the elevation. So there's a thing called the base elevation, and that's what that means is when it rains and floods, there's a point to where the water is going to get to and stop. That's the highest point. So that's your base flood elevation. And then cities usually require a foot above that you have to build the bottom of your house at, above that grade. We're going to require 2. The reason is that grant that I told you guys about of the no match that could potentially fund a code rewrite for us and other factors requires 2. So we're going to go ahead and implement that so that way we can start to move forward on that grant.
That comes through us or is that goes?
No. The only thing that could potentially come before you guys is if we get that grant and we use that money for code rewrites, then we would implement these discussions that we're having into the code rewrites, and you'll see that similar to how the comp plan happened. But that's under the assumption we get those funds. If we don't, then we'll just continue to amend the ordinance ourselves, slowly but surely, how we've been doing for years.
Do we have any idea how long FEMA will take to establish the new floodplain?
So FEMA, actually, I've worked with them. Well, I didn't work directly with FEMA. I worked with the Texas Water Development Board. Her name was Kate DeGennaro, I believe is her last name. She worked with me on the ordinance update. And so FEMA isn't going to be involved in that process, but it should be, if council approves it, it should take effect in September. Because it takes 2 readings at a council meeting to approve that.
And we recently had a dwelling within a present floodplain.
We've had a lot. The home program house we just built, Mr. Martinez's house on Wilcox is in a floodplain, and so they built 1 foot above the base flood elevation.
There's a house on Belton, is that part of the home program? It's not a house yet. It looks like they were getting ready to form a slab. Well, the slab might be there already, but.
No, I know which one you're talking about. It's not a home program
Okay.
house. Home program houses operate pretty quickly. They
was gonna say that,
typically turn
yeah.
around within 3 to 5 months is from the tear down to the finish of the build, because they're under a time frame to get all of that finished, so they're not going to delay.
And more applicants come forward, like for.
We do. We've had a good bit of applicants. There is unfortunate news I will share. It appears that the current administration in office is wanting to remove the funding for HUD, which would mean that there is no more home program until that funding is established. The slight bit of good news in that information is we have funding up until 2027. But after that, if they continue to move forward with removing that funding, then we won't have any funding for home program houses anymore, so the program won't continue until that funding's restored. I have watched the committee hearings, and it seems that there's a bipartisan approach to give them funding. They don't necessarily agree with the administration. The only problem is that's not the House or the Senate that's saying that, which is what's really important.
Well, and also the project that was applying for a grant, that was one of the areas they were applying was under HUD. The other one was through the other program.
Yeah.
So,
And so there's funding still available. So you'll see home program houses at least until 2027. I'll update the commission as I find out information, but right now there is an attempt to remove the funding.
is that your presentation?
That is, what I'll ask of the commission is we're going to need to start having workshops on this, so that way we can start preparing something to present to the council. So we will start to schedule more workshops, so hopefully you guys are available to at least make a quorum. So that way we can start to really dig down deep into each zoning district and what do we want to see, what do we don't want to see. I'll provide more examples of communities. If you want to reach out to me individually of different communities that you may like that have implemented zoning well, or they seem to have a nice live-work environment, then I'll look at their zoning ordinances as well, you know, and implement as much as we can, so that way we have as much of an educated decision as we can on how we're going to move forward.
We also need to add for the next workshop what we're chartered under for if you're going to have absentee for a meeting that we discussed. Can't just add it to the docket.
Okay. The last thing I'll say is that street project that I'm going to send you guys on a spreadsheet is very complex. It'll be a load of information. If you need help digesting any of that, or if you just want to sit down and talk about what my thought process was when we went out there and viewed the streets, call me, meet with me, and we'll discuss that. So that way, when we start to workshop that in November, that we will be prepared for that, and it won't be new.
If we were going to create the comprehensive plan, should we save these pages instead of reprinting, or what is your suggestion?
I'll have to work with Shanna on that and Tim to see how we're going to do that. If we're going to, but we'll most likely give you one set and that will be your set you're responsible for. So if you damage it, then you're gonna have to just start looking at the one online because it's a lot of pages and a lot of ink.
I like that idea.
Why are you looking at me, Shannon?
So we'll be reaching out. We'll probably have a workshop this month, just so you're aware that's on your radar. If you, the sooner that you can let me know if you can make it, so that way we know if we have a quorum, the better.
Thank you all very, very much.
All right, with that being said, it's 3:10 and I hereby adjourn this meeting.